Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation, which I originally delivered at the PCA ACA annual conference in April 2025. And in the call for papers for the Disney Studies area, there was an expression of interest in the queer representations in Walt Disney television series. So, of course, I seized this opportunity to look at the intellectual property of Ducktales through this lens. So why? First and foremost, this IP has a huge international following, so it's popular around the world. I did make a specific point about this in my article in the Journal of American Culture in 2024, and I'd had some subsequent follow-up conversations with other Disney scholars. As I said, the call for paper expressed an interest on this theme, and sadly, diversity, equity, and inclusion themes have become newsworthy and debatable. Just before we get started, a bit of a content advisory. I am going to be discussing topics relating to gender and sexuality. Some of you may find this triggering, some may find it enlightening, but the heads up, that is the focus of the conversation in this video. So before we get started, some of you might be coming to this quite new with fresh eyes. You might be coming at it from a specific academic discipline. But Disney Studies is a multidisciplinary melting pot of knowledge. So hi to friends old and new. Some of you may be looking at this from a comic studies, film studies, animation, media point of view, which are the more traditional views of Disney Studies, maybe. Some people look at it as a sort of applied case study, case in points through sociology, business, tourism. The list is almost endless, to be quite honest. And because of that, I want to explain two key terms that I'm going to talk about throughout this presentation, and they might be new to you given your academic discipline. The first term is queerbaiting. So queerbaiting is quite a negative term, and it refers to the media practice of deliberately hinting at, advertising queer representation to attract and gain the investment of LGBTQ plus viewers without ever following through on this promise. I've highlighted the word ever there because I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. The second term that I wanted to explore with you before we got started is the term queercoding, which involves attributing stereotypically queer traits to characters without explicitly stating their gender or sexual identity. Both of these are contemporary, newsworthy discussions in media studies, but maybe less comfortable for academics from other areas. So, before we explore queerbaiting and queercoding, I wanted to look at something that I call clear queer. There are a couple of instances of clear queerness in Ducktales 2017. So, I just wanted to highlight what they were. And I will send you a cyber high five if you can guess how long a screen time this actually received. So in season 3, minor character Violet, who you can see in the second image, she's the little girl. She gets support for a celebration event at the Junior Woodchucks from her two dads. So can anyone guess how much screen time these two dads actually got? I'm going to give you 2 seconds to guess. Okay, well, it got less than 10 seconds. So by my reckoning, it was like 6 to 7 seconds. So pretty short screen time. And that, my friends, was the only clear queer representation on the 3 series of this show. Okay, so now I've explored the only clear queer example, let's look at some of the other terms that we explored earlier. So, also from season 3 is an example of queerbaiting, and it features this character who's called Penumbra, and she is an extraterrestrial alien character, and she said something very quick which hinted to the audience that she perhaps was not heterosexual. So much so that fans took to social media to talk about it and explore with one another and ask the creators of the show a little bit more about this. So much so that one of the creative leads on the show, called Sam King, did reply to a fan. The fan said, "Hi Sam, since some people are confused, can you tell us what this means? Is she LGBT? Or doesn't she just want to date Earth males? Thank you, and thank you for this incredible episode." Sam replied, "Yeah, for clarity, I had certain constraints I had to work to get this across. Believe me, I'm the first to say I wish it was more overt. But yes, since Penny calls everything on Earth, Earth, her saying Earth male is specifically saying men. She's a lesbian." I'm going to leave it down to you as to whether you think this is queer baiting or not, looking and reflecting on our earlier definition of queer baiting. The next example looks at the term queer coding. So let's unpack that a little bit more. Queer coding in terms of gender and sexuality. Gender is something that is evolving over time. The non-binary gender spectrum is not currently acknowledged in this intellectual property. Sexuality, like one overt same-sex relationship in this show, is clearly at odds with the modern-day society. There's some examples on the next slide of some queer-coded characters, but we don't really see many relationships unfold. And so the show does experience some queer coding, particularly, well, with specific focus on gender and sexuality. The next thing we need to look at is, what is LGBTQI+ in 2025? Well, there's a lot of intersectionality here, and there's a broad spectrum. It has advanced beyond in the last decade, beyond the media trope of effeminate gay men and masculine lesbian women. That in itself presents us with some opportunities to debate, because the idea of a stereotype is maybe different today than it was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So what exactly is the problem? Well, the definition of queer coding relies on a widely held and fixed understanding of stereotypically queer people. My proposition to you is that even possible in 2025? Now, stereotypes clearly do still exist, but are they as powerful as they were? I'm not so sure, and I'll explain why in a few slides' time. But for now, I just want to show you some examples of what I think are some queer-coded characters in this TV show. Here you can see 3 characters. 2 are definitely main characters, 1 maybe more peripheral. Let's start off with Lena, who is the girl character on the far end of the screen. Some fans have referred to Lena online as a demigirl, and I guess like research into what young people stereotype demigirls to maybe include more lesbian stereotypes that young people attribute to are short hair, baggy clothes, sports clothing, and so yeah, Lena fits that if we want to use that word, stereotype that fans might assume. Gyro in the middle is, and it's fair to say at this point, two of these characters, the two either side, are newer characters just for this rebooted series. Gyro is obviously a legacy character from the 1950s. So that in itself shows something, that there's only one legacy character here. Gyro is described online by fans as being sassy, and another fan referred to him as a gay nerd, one word. And research shows that media stereotypes around gay men often include the limp wrist. It just so happens that in this piece of character art, he is demonstrating the wrist movement. So that in itself, I guess, is quite telling. And then the character on the other end is actually called Storkules. This is an interesting one because Storkules is a more peripheral character. He doesn't feature in many episodes, but he consistently demonstrates a passion for Donald, which to many fans implied some bisexuality, especially in season 3 when Donald is actually dating Daisy, and Storkules is quite persistent in ensuring he gets Donald's attention. I mean, the very fact that there's a character based on the ancient Greeks, where we know there was a lot of homoeroticism in that culture, and certainly a normalization of homosexuality in that culture, that in itself maybe says something, to have a character from that period of time and that culture who happens to appear to be queer in some way. It was probably helpful to them because it was an easier way of developing his character narrative. Believe it or not, there is a media industry beyond Disney, and this is worth us exploring actually, because Disney is certainly a dominant player in the media industry, but they're not the only player. And a lot of audience research has been done in the UK, and it shows an increased volume and positive perception of queer people and cultures. There's a lot of successful queer-based intellectual property now. Formats such as RuPaul's Drag Race, I Kissed a Boy as the UK's first gay dating show. These are commercial successes. They are not, although they are there to entertain queer audiences, they are not solely queer products. They are there and are enjoyed and consumed by a mass market too. They feature on mainstream commercial and public sector and public broadcasters. So they are mainstream media products. They are not niche media products anymore. Generally speaking, animated media products are much slower to the uptake in terms of representation. That might be because animated products are assumed to be more tailored to younger audiences, and there is some reticence about queer representation in youth-orientated products. I don't necessarily know why, because there's no reticence towards heteronormativity, but there we are. Delving even deeper into animation, Walt Disney Animation Studios, Disney's television animation are particularly reticent, shall we say, of embracing LGBTQI plus people and stories when you benchmark it to the wider industry. So other animated intellectual property and studios are much more likely to want to showcase these kinds of characters and narratives. What's the problem then? Well, the entertainment industry is poor at queer representation in animation generally. Disney is especially poor at this. And until recently, this was out of step with wider society and media. Sadly, I'm having to strike through that because it seems that on the next slide, phobias are being enabled again. So queerness was really the last frontier of diversity, equity, and inclusion that scared the Walt Disney and scares the Walt Disney Company. There have been public petitions around the two gay ducks, you know, the first clear queer example that I gave you at the beginning of this presentation. Disney have embraced other social advances, often poorly and often much later than they should have done, and with much less vigour than they ought to have done, but that they have advanced them. So even if we just focus on this particular intellectual property, we have a very clear Latino lead character in Fenton, who you can see on the screen there. We have a disabled lead character in Della Duck. You can see her in the corner of the screen. Both have starring central roles in this IP, and their individuality plays an important part of the stories that they're in, rightly so. But could you really imagine a trans lead character in this show? No. Could you imagine a gay or a lesbian or bisexual or non-binary lead character in this show? No. So Disney have advanced other individual characteristics slower, but they've done it. They have not done it in the LGBTQI space. This has not been helped since Trump's re-election, and he has enabled corporate America dismantling their DEI strategies. The question here is, are Disney bold enough to hold on to the gains that they've made so far? Their gains have been slower and with much less zest than other companies, but are they willing to hold on to it? Or will Disney embrace MAGA queerphobia? I think the jury's out on this. What I would say our early signs are they haven't stepped back from a lot of their other advances, such as Tiana's bioadventure in the theme parks, and ensuring that there is a much more ethnically diverse lead cast in a lot of their IP now. So they haven't taken a backward step in that regard, but there's very little backward step they could even take in terms of queer representation anyway. So I don't hold out much hope for much advancement, and I don't think there is much opportunity to backward step in this space anyway. Let's go to some final thoughts. The chief creative of Ducktales 2017, Frank Angones, actually is on the record saying that he's well aware that queer representation through parents and background characters is an issue, and they've stumbled backwards into heteronormative romances due to legacy characters with pre-existing relationships. I think that, despite my respect to Frank and the advancements he did bring to this world, I do think that that is a little bit of a cop-out. Let me explain why. Pre-existing relationships? Well, relationships break down and change. So why not use this show as an opportunity to bring in new relationships? I don't necessarily mean Donald, but there are other legacy characters that you could use that A, did not have pre-existing relationships, and even if they did, it didn't mean you couldn't change them. So I understand why they wouldn't want to tamper with Donald and Daisy. That is an iconic relationship. And of course, heteronormative relationships do exist, and so it's fine for Donald to be straight. But how about using Gyro, who we've alluded to in this presentation as being queer coded? Why couldn't he have a same-sex or a queer relationship, for example? So I think Frank has been a little bit, I guess, not fair enough on the lack of progress there that the show made in this space. That is granting him massive acknowledgement in the space of representation of other protected characteristics. So overall, my feeling is that there's much less clear queer in this show, much more queer baiting and much more queer coding. Both queer baiting and queer coding have problems. Queer baiting because it fails to deliver on an actual promise. And we saw that in Penumbra. She hinted that she was a lesbian, but we never saw that follow through. She didn't actually end up dating a woman. So that was a shame. And queer coding is problematic because it relies on stereotypes, which we know are difficult to even have a consensus on in 2025. Where we do have a consensus, those stereotypes tend to be harmful and negative. So for Ducktales 2017 and all of the advances that it made, it didn't quite fulfill what it could have done in terms of queer representation. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.